I, Jay Hansen, the chair of this meeting for today, call the Construction Industry Energy Board and the Residential and Manufactured Structures Board combined meeting of July 28th at 9:31 a.m. Open and in form. Melissa, would you please call the roll of the Construction Industry Energy Board and then the Residential and Manufactured Structures Board, please?
Chair Jay Hansen from the Mechanical Board.
Present.
Thomas Kyle from the Electrical and Elevator Board.
Here.
Gary Hakenen from the Building Code Structures Board.
Here.
Kale Zuslog from the Building Code Structures Board may arrive late. Ryan Richards from the Electrical and Elevator Board.
Here.
Blake Shalide from the State Department of Energy.
Here.
Walter Cottle from the Mechanical Board. Walt, I wonder if you are on mute. Okay, I see you, that you said here. John Camiller from the Residential and Manufactured Structures Board.
Here.
Eli Volum, Residential and Manufactured Structures Board.
Here.
Matthew Roselle from the State Plumbing Board.
Here.
And Travis Argue from the State Plumbing Board.
Here.
Mr. Chair, we have a quorum.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Melissa. Does anybody have any questions about any of the minutes from our last meetings?
Mr. Chair, may I call roll for the Residential and Manufactured Structures Board?
I'm way ahead of you. Sorry about that, Melissa. Everybody be thinking about your questions from the meeting minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yes.
Gordon Anslow.
Here.
James Austin.
Here.
Forrest Barnes, excused. John Camiller.
Here.
Rich Fry.
Here.
Emily Kemper.
Here.
Douglas Lethine, excused. Rich Tovar.
Here.
Eli Volum.
Here.
Rebbe Temerhalet.
Here.
Mr. Chair, we have a quorum.
Thank you. Do we have any questions or feedback regarding the meeting minutes? Anyone? Anyone? Seeing none, I'm going to rule that the minutes are in order and approve those minutes. We're also moving on to the approval of the additional draft meeting minutes of March 16th. Does anybody have anything in regards to those minutes you want to add? Seeing none, I believe I skipped the agenda and approved 2 meeting minutes. Does anybody have anything in regards to today's agenda that they would like to bring up at this time? Seeing none, I rule that the meeting agenda is in order. Informational announcement about the next meeting dates. The Residential Manufactured Structures Board will meet on October 16th. And the Construction Industry Energy Board will be on October 19th of this year. I'm gonna take a moment now and welcome Ryan Richards from the Energy Board to our group here. Ryan, first of all, we would like to thank Heather Miller for her time and service on the Construction Industry Energy Board. And we want to welcome Ryan, who will be filling in for Heather.
Thank you.
Electrical and Elevation Board on May 27th elected Ryan to serve on the Construction Industry Energy Board, and he is filling Heather's seat. Ryan is signing supervisor for Cochran and electrical contractors. Ryan's got 22 years experience, beginning with his apprenticeship in Astoria in 1999. Really, Ryan's young. Ryan has worked in the residential, commercial, and industrial fields, including canneries, sawmills, offices, government buildings, data centers, hospitals, tank farms, and many other project settings. Ryan volunteered on the electrical testing committee and the Oregon Electrical Specialty Code, good for you, committee with Keith Anderson, electrical chief at the Building Codes Division. Ryan is an Eagle Scout and enjoys traveling and RVing with his wife and their 2 dogs. And Ryan says that he has enjoyed working on the electrical and elevator board and adding his input and helping the industry in a positive way. And I personally want to thank Ryan for starring in a series of movies with Marvel, playing my absolute favorite Marvel character, Deadpool. So thank you very much for your spare time for doing that.
Yeah, that's right. Thanks for having me.
Excellent. Okay, so we're moving on. Section 2, oral testimony. And we're going to have policy analyst Tyler Glaze will introduce and let testimony begin. Is that right, Tyler?
That is correct, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of both boards. My name is Tyler Glaze, policy analyst for the division. Mr. Chair, it looks like we have no one signed up for any general testimony, but we have several people signed up for both agenda items 4 and 5 to testify.
Okay. So we will move on to program update and legislative update. Tony, do you want to start with Tony is the structural program chief?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and members of both boards. For the record, Tony Rocco with the division. And today I have a brief structural program update for the boards. As you'll recall, our 2021 ORSC update training has been posted on our division webpage since March, and we've received some great feedback regarding the content and also the remote accessibility of the update information. And then as a follow-up to that update training, our technical team is planning to hold question and answer presentation in the near future. And that would be geared towards our local government partners. We'll be sending out a notification in advance of the Q&A to all those folks that are signed up to receive division notifications. And if you're not signed up to receive them, you can just log on to our webpage and in the upper ribbon, click on email updates and then follow the on-screen prompts to sign up. And then additionally, we've recently posted a technical bulletin that provides insight on the National Model Code alignment regarding licensed care facilities and other business uses that are permitted by licensure to be located within detached 1- and 2-family dwellings. And that bulletin is available at the top of the Residential Structures Program page. And that concludes my update, Mr. Chair. And as always, I'd welcome any questions from the boards. Thank you.
Any questions? All right. Mark Heiser, mechanical and energy code engineer. Mark, you've got a short statement, I understand.
Yes, thank you, Chair Hansen and Chair Tamel. For the record, Mark Heiser with Division, bringing you some updates on the energy program and a little bit of news that the division will be holding a rulemaking advisory committee in the near future to discuss rulemaking related to the code adoption process. The division plans to send out a solicitation for participants in early August. Interested persons should RSVP when they receive the solicitation. Prior to the meeting, the division will provide additional materials to participants and other persons who express interest. To these committees, especially to the CIEB, there will be a little additional focus on energy codes and some of the adoption methods used. We're going to try and make sure we can get a more consistent methodology for proposals and review of energy modeling and how that's done, to make sure we're all, what is reported to you at the boards is done on an apples to apples basis. And the same with how we'll be looking at cost information for consistent application. So be looking for information on the RACs. I believe the policy people may have more on that. Wanted to note that we are continuing to develop additional help guides and training. For those of you who are not familiar with the residential program page, there are some new BCD technical bulletins, pieces that can help answer some of the gray areas or questions that we commonly have at the division. From the energy perspective on the residential page, there's a great help guide on insulation and installation of ducts, background on whole house ventilation systems, as well as slab bottom grade insulation for new homes. Some really great work from Eric McMullen and others on the policy and technical services group. Really good looking guides. Also, we are working on some guidance for quirks that the division has found in the 2019 version of CommCheck. We'll try and get some application work posted on the energy program page to help people get through the new version of CommCheck. For the 2019 90.1, it is all done via the online CommCheck web. There's no downloadable program anymore. The US DOE is migrating to having all of it online, so they don't have to respond to complaints about there isn't a version for Apple versus Windows versus whatever. So that's just an update on that. And with that, as usual, I am available for questions, but that's all for the energy update. Thank you.
Any questions for Mark? All right, moving on to Julia Heyer. Am I pronouncing that right, Julia? I hope I am.
Yes, you are. Thank you.
Let's hear about the legislature.
Excellent. So good morning, Chair Hansen and members of both boards. For the record, my name is Julia Heyer, Senior Policy Advisor with the Building Codes Division. I am here to present the legislative update. Oregon's regular 2021 legislative session began in January. It came to an end on June 26th. Not all of the bills have been signed into law as of yet. In the packet of materials, you have a summary of bills we thought would be of interest to the board. And the governor has until August 6th to sign or veto the bills before her. And if they're not signed or vetoed at that time, they will take effect. So for those bills that have not yet been signed into law, that's noted in the packet. There will be many bills this session affecting the Building Codes Division. And the purpose of the update is just to give a high-level overview of those bills that we thought would be of most interest. There are also, I'm going to discuss the first section of bills in the packet. There's about 8 other bills we thought that are significant to the division, but not directly relating to CIEB and RMSB. I will skip over those, but feel free to read through them if they are of interest to you. So getting started, the first one is Senate Bill 866, which is our program delegation bill. This bill is correcting issues identified from the Oregon Department of Justice relating to program delegation. It permits a municipality or DCBS to contract with a person to administer and enforce a building inspection program and to act as a building official. And the bill further specifies conditions upon which a municipality may procure services from a contract building official. This one has not yet been signed into law, but it is expected to take effect. It would be signed in August, but the effective date of the bill is January 1 of 2022. So the bill would be implemented through rulemaking, training, enforcement, and when necessary, assumption of a building inspection program. So once the bill is signed into law, or by August 6th, if it's not signed, it just takes effect at that time, we will arrange for a rulemaking advisory committee. We hope that those individuals who joined us for the prior RAC involving program delegation will also be able to meet with us again during this RAC And also the invite's going to be extended to any other persons who are interested in attending. So notice of that RAC will be coming in August once we get more information about the signing of the bill. The division is also working to develop the training program for qualified employees and contract building officials who can now approve commercial building inspections. For the qualified employee, there's a basic training and an advanced training. Basic one has to be taken before they take any action or oversight. And then the advanced has to be within 180 days of them getting designated as a qualified employee. And so we're working through those training programs as well. The next bill to discuss is House Bill 2415 about electronic processes. I see this bill in two parts. The first one is Section 1. This bill takes effect 91 days after adjournment sine die, which is, in this case, September 25 of 2021. This will require DCBS to adopt rules to establish minimum standards and statewide consistency in electronic processes for reviewing plans, issuing permits, and performing field inspections. And so we're going to put together a rulemaking advisory committee, a RAC, this after summer construction season comes to a close. And then we expect to implement the rules once we get sufficient input from that RAC. The second part of the bill that I see is Sections 2 and 3. This part becomes operative in January 1 of 2025, and it requires municipalities that administer and enforce building inspection programs to use the department's electronic system for accessing building codes information or to use something equivalent. And they also have to meet minimum standards that the department adopts, regardless of whether they're using our system or an equivalent system. So for this part of the bill, we plan to also utilize the RAC that I just talked about to help explore terminology in the bill and get other ideas related to rulemaking surrounding these pieces. We may pursue some pilot programs to iron out details, and we're going to have meetings with contractors and building officials to seek additional ideas. We ultimately hope to iron out all the rules related to this section of the bill in 2023, and that would give municipalities time to create their own system with that January 1, 2025 operative date. The next bill is Senate Bill 762. This is the wildfire bill, the big wildfire bill that passed the legislature. And it has not yet been signed into law at the time that the report was prepared. I just checked OLS and it's still saying it's not signed into law, although I had heard that it was. So right around getting signed. The bill is extensive. I'm just going to highlight the bolded portions, which is what most relates to the Building Codes Division, but there's a lot of other pieces to this. The bill will direct the State Board of Forestry to establish criteria for developing and maintaining a statewide map of wildfire risk that displays wildfire risk classes, which are extreme, high, moderate, low, and no risk. The map will be populated to the Oregon Wildfire Risk Explorer, which must be made publicly available in an electronic format. OSU is going to be consulted during the establishment of the risk classes and the universities to develop and maintain the map. There is an opportunity for public input when looking at the wildfire risk classes, and also the assignments of the risk class can be appealed. The map has to be completed by June 30th of 2022. And again, that's the State Board of Forestry that you'll see in a moment that plays into work that the Building Codes Division will be doing. The Wildfire Risk Explorer is declared the official wildfire planning and risk classification mapping tool for the state. So as it relates to DCBS and the Building Codes Division, it does require the adoption of certain building code standards. For those extreme and high wildfire risk classes that are being established in the wildland urban interface, we are required to adopt wildfire hazard mitigation building code standards that apply to new dwellings and the accessory structures of dwellings, as described in R327 of the 2021 ORSC. Those actions need to be taken place by October 1 of 2022, with the standards not becoming operative before April 1 of 2023. So it gives us 6 months phase in. And the standards have to be incorporated into any updates of the ORSC. It also requires the R327 to be amended to include standards for additions to existing dwellings and accessory structures, and for the replacement of existing exterior elements covered in the current R327. Again, by October 1 of next year, and then an operative date of April 1 of 2023, and incorporating any updates in the ORSC. And then not more than 2 years after those standards are adopted, DCDS also has to update R327 of the ORSC to accomplish certain requirements in the bill. DCDS also must develop and maintain an interactive mapping tool that displays at the property level wildfire hazard mitigation standards that are covered in Section R327 of the ORSC. The tool is to be designed to support future inclusion of snow load, seismic, and wind building code standards at the property level. And the development of the tool is taking place not more than 60 days after the statewide map of wildfire risk is developed. There's the need for collaboration and possible agreements with OSU for those tools. And the tools will be displayed in an electronic format available to the public at no charge and periodically updated when the relevant building code is updated. The bill also establishes the Wildfire Programs Advisory Council, and DCDS has to provide staffing to assist with that council, attending meetings, giving reports, supporting the work of the state wildfire programs director. And the bill will take effect on passage. So there's a lot to this bill. Again, I only highlighted the things that are more directly related to the Building Codes Division, but it will require some rulemaking and code work that will likely be in full swing by next summer. Updated codes will likely take effect October 1, 2022 with that 6-month phase-in, and then that in 2 years updating the R327, also developing and maintaining that interactive mapping tool that I referred to in collaboration with OSU, and being available to participate in that Wildland Program Advisory Council. The next one, House Bill 2289, also relates to wildfire for wildfire rebuild. The bill establishes an alternative process for alteration, restoration, or replacement of certain uses affected by the 2020 wildfires. It does allow for some rebuilds to occur in compliance with the applicable building codes that were in effect on the later of January 1 of 2008, or the date of the former dwelling's construction. It expands eligibility to repair or replace subsurface sewage disposal systems for dwellings approved under the alternative process. The bill will sunset in 2031. And the division's preparing materials to compare the relevant building codes to assist with implementation of the bill, and we're of course available to answer any questions relating to the applicable codes. Next bill, House Bill 5006. It's referred to as the Christmas tree bill. It's another extensive bill that is awaiting signature. And I would refer anybody to the bill to get the full scope. As you can tell by the section numbers, there's section 278 is the highest one I have listed in here, but there's quite a bit to it. But things that are more directly relating to building codes, section 194 does provide money to building and planning departments. Section 263 provides just over $10 million to DCDS for a residential and commercial fire hardening grant program. That will require us to create the program, and we're working on some rulemaking related to that to get all of that implemented. And then Section 278 includes money for rebuilding. Next bill, House Bill 2180. It requires the director to amend the state building code to require that new construction of certain buildings include provisions for electrical service capacity for a specified percentage of parking spaces. It allows the municipality to adopt a local percentage of parking space requirements higher than the state building code requirements, and requires the director to make code amendments by July 1 of next year. The bill will require rulemaking and coordination with the Electrical and Elevator Board with that adoption date in July of next year. House Bill 2062 is the Oregon Department of Energy bill relating to energy efficiency standards for certain appliances sold and offered for sale in the state. The bill, there's no current action required by the Building Codes Division for this bill, but it does involve us in the sense that it directs the director of the Oregon Department of Energy to consult with the State Plumbing Board before defining certain terms. It's also authorizing the director of the Oregon Department of Energy to consult with appropriate advisory boards at DCDS to adopt rules to update the minimum efficiency standards or test methods to a more recent version if certain requirements are met. House Bill 3219, Manufactured Dwelling Parks. This bill amends the definition of a manufactured dwelling park to include parks with certain prefabricated structures. It requires local governments to approve reconstruction after natural disasters. The bill also allows the director of DCBS to exempt those manufactured dwelling parks from certain building codes. And then there's some landlord-tenant pieces as well. BCD plans to provide this bill to the building officials who have recently been affected by a wildfire at the OBOA conference, which just took place, and we provided them with that information. There's no rulemaking related to the bill that's anticipated at this time. House Bill 2560 is remote meetings and testimony. So the bill requires a governing body of a public body, to the extent reasonably possible, to make all meetings accessible remotely to members of the general public through technological means, and to provide an opportunity for members of the general public to remotely submit oral and written testimony when that type of testimony is allowed in person. Imposes the same requirements for certain hearings and takes effect of January 1 of next year. So this means for us that we're going to continue keeping our meetings accessible remotely to the general public and allowing that type of testimony in all situations where oral or written testimony is allowed in person. And then the final bill to discuss with all of you is House Bill 2992, compensation to board members. This is also awaiting signature last time I had looked. It modifies the amount of compensation paid to members of state boards and commissions, and requires state boards and commissions, the payment to be made to certain members with an adjusted gross income below a certain threshold. The bill provides that members may decline to accept compensation or reimbursement, and it will take effect September 25 of 2021. So we will be in communication with all board members about this new law. We'll be getting a letter out with additional details in the event that is something that will relate to your situation. So that concludes my update for today, but I am happy to answer any questions that any board members may have.
Thank you, Julia. That is a lot of information. You and Alana and the entire staff have been very busy these last months preparing all this legislative effort and tracking it, engaging with it. It takes a lot of effort. Any questions? I'm sure everybody has some question in regards to this new legislation. But seeing none.
Chair Hansen, can I just interrupt and apologize for my tardiness, as I've been trying to facilitate a couple meetings at the same time today and this morning, but would like you to know that I have logged into the meeting.
Thank you for doing so, and thank you for interrupting. I appreciate that. Tyler, we're going to move on to unfinished business. Could you please introduce what we are going to be talking about and acting on?
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the boards. This issue is agenda item 4, unfinished business, with the recommended approval of the 2021 Oregon Residential Reach Code. Mr. Chair, just to remind you, there are at least three pieces of submitted written testimony and six requests for oral testimony today. Just as a quick overview, that we're requesting as the division that the board review and consult on the division's proposed process and timeline for developing and adopting the 2022 ORSC, the Oregon Residential Reach Code. Excuse me, that should be ORSC. ORS 455-500 requires that the division, in consultation with the CIEB, adopt a REACH code, a code separate from the state building code. The REACH code is a set of statewide optional construction standards and methods that are economically and technically feasible, which are intended to increase energy efficiency. The division adopts one REACH code specific to residential structures and one specific to commercial structures. The division is planning on adopting the 2022 ORSC with an October 1st, 2022 effective date, and is advising the board that the division is starting the process of adopting the 2022 commercial REACH code. So,
hey, Tyler.
Yes,
sorry, this is Alana. I think we're on the wrong memo. We're getting to commercial later. I think we're starting with residential.
Excuse me, that is my mistake.
That's right.
Let me get to the correct one, and I will go over that. Here we are, the Oregon Residential Reach Code. Excuse me. The 2021 ORSC is an optional set of standards designed to increase energy efficiency. All municipalities must accept the REACH code, and it provides an additional efficiency compliance path for builders, consumers, contractors, and others. The REACH code must be economically and technically feasible and must be more efficient than the building code. The division solicited public input and proposals for what should be included in the 2021 ORRC. Interested parties were invited to propose provisions to include in the REACH code and comment on the format, proposed methodologies, and provide general comments. Proposals were based on then anticipated 2021 Oregon Residential Specialty Code as approved by the Residential and Manufactured Structures Board at its October 7th, 2020 meeting. The solicitation for REACH code proposals opened on November 2nd, 2020 and closed on December 16th, 2020. The division received several proposals which were refined through outreach and dialogue between division staff and stakeholders. Additionally, outreach specific to electric vehicle readiness language and solar readiness language was done to align those sections with the model code, incentive programs, installer experience, and the electrical code. On January 25th, 2021, the division held a public meeting to hear comments and questions regarding the 2021 ORRC. Public input was also taken at the January 26, 2021 meeting of the Department of Energy's Energy Code Stakeholder Panel. All the comments and questions from the January meetings, as well as any additional written public comments, were taken into consideration when the division drafted the proposed 2021 ORRC. The board considered the proposed 2021 ORRC at the combined March 16, 2021 meeting. At that time, the state legislature was still in session and was actively considering legislation that would impact the development and adoption of the ORRC. The boards decided to table consideration of the 2021 ORRC until after the legislature was finished considering the issue. Ultimately, the legislature did not act on the legislation affecting the REACH code this session. The division has made a change to the prescriptive envelope requirements table and the accompanying footnotes. In the equivalent value field in the wall insulation above grade row, R23 has been changed to R21. In footnote C below the table, R23 has been changed to R21 in the second and third sentences. These changes were made to accurately align with the required performance value of U0.057 and the alternative equivalent value of R13 plus 6. The division invites discussion from the boards regarding the adoption of the 2021 ORRC and seeks their recommendations. And as you can see, there are several options recommended there. Mr. Chair, Administrator Alana Cox is here to discuss technical information. We also have those members signed up for public testimony.
Thank you, Tyler. At this time, we're going to open this for public comment. We do have 3 written comments. Tyler, would you please introduce the public commentators?
Okay, through the chair, Jay, sorry. Do you mind if I just jump in really quick before we get into public comment?
Sure, okay.
Thanks. Administrator Cox, for the record, thanks everyone for coming together today. I know it's kind of vacation season for the lucky ones, so we've asked a lot of your time. And you got a great legislative update from Julia. Just one bill, and it was mentioned in the memo that was not on the list, was HB 2398, which we talked about earlier this year. It would have allowed local government to make the REACH code mandatory. And ultimately it didn't pass, but I know conversations are ongoing about that concept. I just want to flag that we're bringing you this REACH code proposal under the laws we have today in conjunction with the directive and executive order 2004. If the laws around the development or the application of the REACH code do change, we will come back to you. If you approve this residential REACH code, it will be under ORS 455-500 as it reads today, which is an optional above code standard. Also want to flag, Mark mentioned in his program update that we're putting together a rulemaking advisory committee on the code development process with a particular focus on energy code adoption. This will also include rulemaking around the process for the REACH code, so that hopefully going forward we can come up with a REACH code adoption process that works for everyone. I know it's been a little confusing with all the moving pieces on this, so we're here to be resources. I know you do have some public comment. Mark Heiser's here as well for any technical questions. Thanks.
Thank you, Alana. Now I'd like Tyler to open it up for the public comment.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Do we have Jim Edelson, Director of Policy for the New Buildings Institute?
Jim, before you start, I want to let everyone know who's going to be presenting some public comment. We've got quite a few, and we've got a long meeting ahead of us here. So we're going to limit it to 5 minutes for each commentator. So you've got 5 minutes. And go ahead, Jim. Is Jim Edelson available?
I don't see his name on the attendee list here.
Okay, how long do we, he's requested public comment time. How long do we move him to the end? Let's move on to the next one, Tyler.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Next on our list is Shilpa Sarana, an engineer with the Northwest Energy Efficiency Alliance.
Hi, this is Shilpa Sarana representing Northwest Energy Efficiency Alliance. NEA is supportive of the approval of the proposed 2021 Oregon Residential Reach Code, which is presented by the BCD staff today and recommended to go into effect October 1st, 2021. I'm building on the testimony which we provided on March 16th of this year. We strongly feel this proposal attempts to bring the 2021 Oregon Residential Reach Code into alignment with the goals of the Executive Order 17-20 created for the 2023 Oregon Residential Specialty Code and will achieve at least equivalent performance to the DOE Zero Energy Ready Specification version 6. We recognize some changes were made to the proposal. I additionally just confer the cost estimates which were provided by NEA in Zero were based on the least cost version of the advanced framing, assuming studs 24 inches on center in R21 bats with a required performance value of U value 0.057. So we support the changes BCD has made. And we agree that the overall cost increase represents less than 1% increase in the sales price to the consumers, thereby improving the code energy efficiency by approximately 10 to 15% over the current code. And this would be the end of my testimony here. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Tyler, who's the next presenter?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Again, Tyler Glaze for the board. Next up, we have Ryan Shanahan from Zero Energy Certification, the Zero Energy Certifications Manager from Earth Advantage.
Thank you. So I work at Earth Advantage, but I'm representing the Zero Coalition today. We worked with NEA and Shilpa specifically on our proposal, so you'll see a lot of overlap between the two. I won't reiterate everything Shilpa just said. We're largely in support of this change as well. But I did want to highlight that part about the walls where we suggested there could be a cost savings from going this direction of close to $2,000 per home. That was the idea, is that with reduced lumber, and we used 2019 lumber pricing, you could actually save some money. We also proposed prescriptive updates of requiring both blower door testing and duct testing, and then increased some of the optional updates. And our proposal in particular also calls out EV ready, meaning electric vehicle ready, and PV ready or photovoltaic ready as well. And that is the end of my testimony. Thank you.
Thank you, Ryan. Next on the list is Lauren Bulling from NECA.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, you can.
Thanks, Chair. So for the record, my name is Lauren Bulling, and I'm here on behalf of the National Electrical Contractors Association. NECA has not formally commented on past REACH code proposals because historically the REACH code has been an aspirational standard. However, as Julia mentioned earlier, House Bill 2398 in 2021 sought to, for the first time, make REACH codes mandatory or allow local jurisdictions to adopt the REACH code as the mandatory base code. As a result of this, NECA strongly believes that the building code's rules for normal development of the REACH code should be followed. The normal code development process, as you're aware, is based on national code standards for the process of technical substantiation to both document and prove the proposals are practical and applicable based on proven scientific principles. NECA strongly believes that this technical substantiation process for REACH code proposals should include certification from national testing labs, engineering reports, or other scientific materials from credible, unbiased sources, and not solely reliant on estimates provided by the entities proposing a revision to the code. Another thing that we are very concerned about is cost impacts. Cost impacts are an important consideration for any code provisions that are mandatory or may become mandatory. Because proponents of House Bill 2398 in the 2021 session have also pledged to pass a bill in the February session coming up to make REACH codes mandatory, we believe the REACH code should begin going through the same cost analysis process as other proposed revisions to the building code. As energy policy is not generally considered a life safety item, additional costs to both building owners and tenants are an important factor to consider in the development of revisions to the code. The cost-benefit analysis needs to include any additional mortgage costs, taxes, fees, and any potential returns on investment, if any, after the added costs are fully taken into account. While the original REACH code concept was designed to foster innovation and create an appropriate safe harbor for builders willing to experiment with cutting-edge energy efficiency, a mandatory base code is no place for experimentation. NECA respectfully asks the agency to have any proposed changes to the REACH code follow the normal BCD process for code adoption. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Lauren. And next on our list is Zach Snyder from Solar Oregon. Mr. Chair, I do not see Mr. Snyder connected.
All right, we will move on to the next and put Mr. Tyler and Mr. Edelson at the end and give them one more shot.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Next up is Angela Crowley-Koch from OSCE.
Hello, this is AJ Zwiebelman with OSCE, standing in for Angela today. Thank you for the opportunity to speak on behalf of OSCE. And thank you for your consideration of the REACH code. The Oregon Solar Plus Storage Industries Association represents all facets of the solar industry in Oregon, and Solar Oregon educates consumers on the value of solar energy and how to obtain it. And we appreciate your attention to this important issue. The REACH code contains an updated and improved solar ready code, which will make the provisions easier for both builders and homeowners. The solar ready code in the REACH proposal is a true solar ready code. Due to the updates in the language, homeowners will actually be getting a new home which will be prepared to have a solar system. In addition, solar ready homes also make homes more resilient. Should a homeowner with solar choose to install a battery backup system with their PV system. After the severe power outages Oregon has faced in the last 6 months, giving new homes better ability to be energy independent is critical. The solar ready provisions in the REACH code also contain 3 exceptions to the solar ready provisions for builders, which are common sense ways to minimize costs to builders. Including these exceptions provides a good balance between preparing most homes to be solar ready, but only homes that can truly be solar ready. The cost of making homes solar ready is minimal compared to the benefit of a homeowner wanting to install solar. Any experienced electrician can make a home solar ready for around $500 to $700. Trying to install solar on a home that is not solar ready could cost a customer as much as thousands of dollars more. The solar-ready provisions in the REACH code will save home buyers money as the residential solar market in Oregon continues to grow. As you consider the REACH code, we respectfully request that the March 2021 proposal be adopted. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. I believe we still have Jim Edelson, the director of the new buildings, the director of policy with the New Buildings Institute. But Mr. Chair, I do not see him connected.
All right. Then the other one is that was Mr. Snyder.
Correct.
Mr. Snyder jumped on.
I do not see him as well.
So I will move us forward and open the adoption of this REACH code, residential REACH code, for discussion amongst the board. Is there anyone who has some discussion to bring before the board?
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
Hi, Gary Hickman, a member of the Energy Board. It's too bad that Mr. Edelson is not on the call here, but he did submit testimony asking that the board consider the energy rating index set forth in the REACH code. And I think, to be fair, we ought to at least visit the issue here and have some discussion on it. The ERI, the Energy Rating Index, if you have Mr. Edelson's letter in front of you, the REACH code established an ERI level of 53. NDI had proposed 47. He had some strong arguments in support. I guess I would like to hear maybe from Mark Heiser, if we could, a little bit of the logic behind setting that ERI type target at 53.
Mark, could you do that for us?
Yes, through the chair, Mark Heiser with the division, members of CIEB and the RMSB. The energy rating or index that is being put forward in the code, the intent for the REACH code was to get equivalent to or better than the performance of the U.S. Department of Energy's Zero Energy Ready Homes program. So they have a program out there. As part of their program, they ask home builders to do a HERS rating, which is essentially a codified, the ERI is essentially a codified version of the HERS rating for a home. The Oregon Department of Energy and the Building Codes Division, as part of our work, were in direct communication with the United States Department of Energy's ZERH program. And we wanted to verify what would be, for the state of Oregon, a recommended level when doing an ERI path. So directly from the United States government program came that a 53 ERI rating would be appropriate. It was actually, so that was verified with U.S. Department of Energy. We requested additional feedback from Northeast Energy Efficiency Alliance. The response was that the ERIs are in an acceptable range. One thing that we noted is that it appears that NBI is comparing to version 2.0 of the ZERH program. So from this standpoint, it's pretty apparent that in working with both Department of Energy in Oregon, U.S. Department of Energy, and the Northwest Energy Efficiency Alliance, that we're probably in a pretty good range for this ERI path. A little additional background on the ERI path that is included, it's sort of a performance path that's available in the International Energy Conservation Code. We were looking to, since there was a proposal to possibly have an ERI performance path, to see whether we could use the REACH code as sort of a pilot to see whether HERS ratings could be used for compliance here in Oregon. It's popular in other states. It's used in the National Model Code. We wanted to see if it could be used. So if it was getting adopted, we would like to see that, what are the issues? How can we resolve enforcement of using this HERS rating? Would it work? Could it be considered for future code? The proposed ERI of 47 was well past what the prescriptive path was. So people would probably not be picking the ERI path under the REACH code simply because it would have a substantial amount of additional cost to reach that additional efficiency. We're hoping to see if people are interested in using that, that would be a bit of a deterrent to go that additional level. And as additional backup or notation is that Building Codes Division and the Department of Energy have been tasked with, looking at Executive Order 20-04. That's that executive order that says we need to continue to reduce the site regulated energy use of homes in our code through the year 2030. There have been expressed concerns of whether or not going to the ZERH equivalency in 2023 would be enough. Both the division and the Oregon Department of Energy have looked at this, and we've seen that yes, if in 2023 you meet Executive Order 1720, that was the one that says for the next code cycle we need to be equivalent to the US DOE ZERH program version 06, that we would also be on track to meeting Executive Order 2004. And that is also backed up by the testimony from Northwest Energy Efficiency Alliance. What they provided testimony in March that said, and I wanted to get the quote here, adopting a code that achieves at least equivalent performance levels with the DOE ZERH specification in 2023 would put the state back on track to achieve the 2030 goal. NEA has published some documents that show that, yes, going to the ZERH in the 2023 code will maintain that slope of reducing energy use in homes to align with the Executive Order 2004. So that was one clarification I wanted to make on that as well. But again, if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. Appreciate that.
Is there any other comments?
Through the chair, I would like to add that on the Oregon Electrical Elevator Board, we have adopted energy efficient policies and rules around lighting, EV charging stations, and whatnot. And we followed kind of a normal code adoption process for that. I don't feel like this has followed that kind of slope for normal code adoption. It hasn't followed a standard adoption process, and it's not based on national standards or proven scientific principles. It's kind of reaching for different rules and other things, and so it's not really based in scientific principles. And I'm also concerned about the cost impacts that they're not based on standards, and there can be significant cost impacts on that. And so my feeling is that we need to take this back and follow a normal code adoption process based on science and proven methods. That would be my overall recommendation.
Okay. Ryan, when you talk about cost impact, a budget was presented what the cost impact would be. Was that not you say you have some doubts about that. Is there some doubts about the objectivity of that?
How did we get to that? Because, you know, I saw one thing that was, you know, $4,000 to $6,000 more on a home, and it doesn't. Looking at some of those ideas or concepts, they seem like, you know, they have the potential to reach well over that cost impact. That $4,000 to $6,000 for a additional on a home. More of my concern is just the policy on how we got to this REACH code, and it didn't follow the normal, you know, process for the code adoption, just like we would in the electrical code on amending the standards, or like a plumbing code. It didn't go through the various boards and go through that process.
You raise a very, very good point, and the process point is the most critical. I might ask a question to Director Cox. Alana, are you still on the line?
Yep.
How was this proposal generated? How was it created? What was the process used to develop this?
Sure. Thank you, Chair Hansen.
What was it? The normal? I've been involved with these code development processes, and I'm fairly familiar with the steps that we take and the objectivity that is applied. Can you comment a little bit on that?
Sure. Thank you. So the REACH code, because it is an aspirational code, does not have all the same trappings as a mandatory code adoption process. So we tried to kind of mirror some of the aspects of that process, because when we went to adopt the REACH code, we didn't really have any rules that say, here's how you do it, right? Like we do for the other codes. So we did request proposals. That's something we typically do. We had some hearings and tried to develop a consensus product to bring to you. It did not have a code committee to make a recommendation to this board. So it had some of the usual process, but not the other stuff. It also does not get adopted by administrative rule, which the other codes do. That's how you enforce a code, is because it has the power of administrative rule. But because this is not a code that gets enforced, it does not get adopted by rule. But as I mentioned earlier, I think we recognized that we were kind of making it up as we went along on this. So, you know, I accept that feedback. We tried to kind of make it have the look and feel of a normal process, recognizing it doesn't have all those other pieces. But when we do go into this code development rule process with the RAC we're putting together, this is one of the questions we want to answer. I think there's no reason we couldn't adopt some rules that say we're going to adopt the REACH code just like we adopt other codes. We're going to adopt it by administrative rule. We're going to have a code committee. We can fill in those blanks that didn't exist for this REACH code if that's the desire of the board and the RAC.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
Through the chair, Rich Fry.
Rich?
I may, yes. So I'm very, very concerned about this, seeing as how the legislature tried to pass the bill, and it didn't, and I think that it will come forward. If we were to adopt something that hasn't gone through the process, it's going to be really hard to back up and go to something less restrictive. And when it was aspirational, I don't think anyone had any problems with people trying to go above and beyond to make a better home and a better product for the end consumer. However, even Solar Oregon said, well, you know, our estimate is $700 to $800, but it could be $1,000 or $2,000. And when you think about the number of houses that actually have solar on them, how does that work out? $700 or $800 for 1,000 houses and solar in 200 houses? You know, it's a considerable impact to the building community. And with the price of homes today, we can't afford to make anything that costs more in our codes that we don't pass through the process that we use to do our codes.
Yes.
And my concern is that if we pass this, the legislature comes on and says, okay, now we're going to make it where the municipalities can make this their base, that we're going to really struggle to get this to a more manageable level if that's what indeed we decide to do as a committee. So I don't support this.
My fear, thank you very much, but my fear is if Alana, what was the number of the bill that did not pass that I'm thinking of? Is like 2884,
2398.
2398. That particular bit of legislation really scared me from a contractor point of view. That would sort of open up. I mean, there'd be no standard code. Every municipality could listen to a presentation from any particular entity that wanted their specific product that might promise some great benefit to be written into their individual code. It'd be the wild, wild west from a code point of view. That really scares me. I've just personally recently hired a gentleman, a project manager out of Big Bear, California. And in his this is the way California runs it. Every municipality can have their own code. And if we establish a reach code that has not been reached or agreed upon through the normal process, that's going to open, that really scares me. Really, really scares me. Is there any other comments?
Mr. Chair?
Through the chair, this is John Camiller.
Yes.
I'm sorry, somebody else is speaking.
Well, I had a comment.
So, thank you. So I'm an engineer, and I believe that if you have a set of standards, then you work the set of standards. And this code, the REACH code, went through a completely different set of standards for its development and presentation today. And while I feel comfortable with the code as a REACH code, as it was originally intended to be implemented as aspirational, I'm not comfortable at all putting our technical seal of approval on something that was approved for one situation, but by the time it's in front of a city council in, some towns, call it Ashland, with a bunch of with a host of city councilors that aren't technically qualified, if you will, and it's going to be presented as, well, the residential structures board, and they've approved it, and we haven't approved it. What we approved was an aspirational code. We haven't approved a building code, and that building code is supposed to be the same everywhere in the state. And there's so many little towns in this state. I just don't see it happening. I don't think that this is the way to go. I cannot support adopting the code today, knowing that the legislature is going to, I'm sure, is going to pass that bill that allows local government to make this their code. I just can't support it. So I think we ought to table it and put it through the regular code approval process and have the scientific investigation and the engineering investigation and a third party development of the cost impacts and the implementability, if you will, of the code and how it's going to affect not only those individual costs, the first costs, but what about costs like the carrying costs and the real estate costs. So if you increase the cost of a house $5,000, there's other costs over time that get increased, and I don't think we've looked at that, and I just can't support it at this point. Thank you,
John. Yeah, some of those carry costs might include tax and various other things. Gary, I apologize. I saw your hand up, but I heard John's name, so I let John slip in ahead. Gary,
No worries at all. I would have these same concerns if this were a mandatory code, but I'm going to be voting in favor of adopting this REACH code because it's not a mandatory code. It is an aspirational and voluntary code. It is something that's been called for in the executive order. I believe we will have an opportunity, as Alana and Mark have mentioned, to convene a committee to review the process for adopting codes, and most especially the energy code and the REACH code. But at this point in time, I'm in support of this as the REACH code because it is not mandatory. A city cannot just adopt it willy-nilly. I don't think we can, what if the legislature acts and to have that type of discussion. I believe that if the legislature were to act, that we would have another cut at a REACH code that's no longer voluntary. So I understand the concerns. I share the same concerns if there were a mandatory code with the ability to adopt by local jurisdiction, but it's not. So I'm in favor of adopting it as the REACH code it is today.
Thank you, Gary. Is there any other comment?
Yeah, Blake Schlide, through the chair. I guess I recognize too that this code didn't go through, this REACH code proposal didn't go through the same process as a normal code, but it did have a relatively comprehensive process for development. A number of public stakeholder meetings, public review process. I think BCD did a great job to kind of bring it as close to possible as a normal code review process to get to where we are today. And a lot of development and stakeholder input went into it. If you guys remember our last board meeting, we kind of did exactly what some of the folks are talking about today and tabled it, kind of pending the development of House Bill 2398 on the REACH code. So here we are today, kind of faced with the same decision again about whether to adopt it. And I guess I just kind of like to echo some of Gary's comments and just remind the board what we are and aren't voting on today. We're voting on it as a potential voluntary REACH code that can't be adopted by a jurisdiction. It can't be made mandatory. And I fully expect and trust that if something does change with the way that the law is structured around the REACH code, that as a board we'll have the full opportunity to go through the a proper review process if it does become something that is able to be adopted as mandatory. But I prefer not to kind of work with these hypotheticals of what if and what could come and really just vote on what we have in front of us today under the current REACH code statute. Thank you.
Thank you, Blake. Emily, you had your hand up.
Yeah, through the chair. Thank you. I would like to echo what Gary and Blake just said. I think it's our job to look at what we have in front of us, not our job to speculate on what the legislature is or is not going to do in 3 months or 6 months. And I do think for what it is, the REACH code has gone through a pretty thorough review. I'd also like to mention that with respect to the cost analysis that was done, I think most folks on here would agree that the cost of materials and the cost of land and the cost of the housing market itself have driven up the cost of building a new home far above and beyond what is being proposed in the REACH code as a potential increase. So I think that there are, I think that a less than 1% increase in cost to building a home is a perfectly a reasonable amount for something like a REACH code where we're trying to push ourselves. And I think that we all know that externalities can cause the cost of a home to increase a lot more than just the $165 per square foot that was used in the analysis. So I think for what it is, I think this REACH code has done a pretty good job. It checks a lot of boxes, and I think it's a responsible use of our time to focus specifically on the proposal in front of us and not to speculate on what the legislature is going to do. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other comments from board members?
Yes, through the chair. Eli Volm. Can I go ahead? I think I might have jumped in first. On the Residential Manufactured Structures Board and the Construction Industry Energy Board, I want to echo I have the same sentiments that Gary and Blake and Emily shared. I think we need to look at the targets that are out there today and the rules that we need to follow today, and not try to speculate about what might change in the future. The other thing I really want to point out is we have this target of the zero energy ready home for 2023. What we're right now is a roadmap for that. So whether we like it or not, that's where we're heading. And I think everyone recognizes this is currently an aspirational code. And I would suspect that most of us would bet that very few people are going to build to it. That I guess that's neither here nor there, but this is a roadmap. I mean, this is where we're going to head. And so industry can start to get prepared by looking at a specification that could get us there. I like that this has been vetted by the Department of Energy at the national level. I like that Northwest Energy Efficiency Alliance has looked at it. They have energy engineers over there. There's a lot of agreement that this will get us to the target that we're looking at in a couple years. The reason we didn't vote on it last time is we were told that if that bill had passed, we would be coming back and redoing it. So I suspect that, here I am anticipating, if something passes, then it would be coming back for discussion and review, and hopefully would follow a regular code process. So I am in support of it based on the folks that have put it together and validated it as an aspirational code. It provides a roadmap for where we're going. And I do appreciate all the public comment. I will just add a little caveat that I very much appreciate it when people submit it early. When it comes in morning of the meeting, I bet it does not get the attention from every board member that it probably could if it was submitted days or a week before. And the board packet's been out for a while. So I will say that I do appreciate the comments, but it's nice to have some time to digest them. So thanks for the opportunity to share my thoughts, and I am in support of what is presented today.
Any other board member comments?
Through the chair, this is John Camiller again. I'd like to ask Elena to explain the comments. What do you mean, bring it back? After the legislature has passed a rule or a legislation that says that the code that exists can be implemented by a municipality that votes to implement it, to make it part of their code. Explain what you mean by bring it back, because I just heard several people saying, oh, this is aspirational and we have to vote on it as aspirational. But I have an expectation that it's going to become required by the legislature. And so I'd like to know what your opinion is on how we would do that, how that legislation that tells a city they can implement it, where's the bring it back part come in? Thank you.
That'd be great. Alana, could you elaborate?
Sure, thank you. And we're going to get a little bit into hypothetical land, but I'll look back at the last session as well. So, one of the differences between this code and a regular mandatory code is that it's not adopted by administrative rule. It doesn't require the cost finding by the board, some of those things. During the legislative conversation in the last session, there was feedback and amendments to the end of, well, if this is going to be made a mandatory code, it needs to have all those trappings of a mandatory code. And so that was part of the legislation. I think even if that wasn't included in legislation, we would have to do that legally. We would have to adopt it by administrative rule. So I don't think that this code that's in front of you today could just be automatically turned into a mandatory code through legislation without coming back to the board and asking for approval to go into rulemaking like we would on other mandatory codes, and probably going through the whole code adoption process like we were talking about earlier, which is how it shook out in the previous bill. So I understand, I don't want to say we're the government, trust us or whatever, but I am committed to you that this code is only for this purpose. What we're asking you today is under the current laws. If the laws change, we will have to come back to a board unless the legislature says this is a code that doesn't go through any board, which would be, I guess I can't guarantee that wouldn't happen, but we'd have to go through rulemaking. which this code would not be going through because it's an aspirational code. Does that answer the question? I think it's kind of one part legal and one part political, right? It's like legally, I think we'd have to adopt an administrative rule to have a code be made mandatory anywhere. Politically, I understand how having a code out there as an aspirational code with conversations around making it mandatory, you know, might have some political implications.
Good, Chair, Rich Fry. If I could, I've heard two different things here, and Mark made the comment about making this as a pilot, which tells me that what's in this is going to be looked at very carefully by not only state government, but by city governments as well, and that they're going to start their expectations on what we put out today. And to hear that the legislature could say, yeah, what's in effect is now in effect, whether it's politically driven or what, leads me to have a lot of concern about putting this out there. I would love it if every builder in the state would build to an aspirational code and we had these, you know, really efficient homes. But at the same time, I'm going back to affordability, and every dollar that we add to the cost of a house eliminates 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 families from being able to buy a home. And we have to look at that as well. And with what's happened over the last year in pricing, I just don't think that we can add an aspirational goal line that we would like to get to and then have that come back and be our standard. So that's it. Thank you.
Any other board comments?
Yes, Chair Hampton, this is Tom Kyle from the Electrical Board. Things like if we would follow the proper code adoption procedures and we send this back and have it done, then if there is, if the legislature does say adopt it and force it to be mandatory, then we have a code that has been properly vetted and gone through all the right processes. So we kind of remove the risk for builders to do that. I would be more inclined to have it. That's the basis of the code now, is to go back and run it through the right process so that it is an actual code that we can all get behind. Thank you.
Any other board comments?
Yeah, through the chair, this is Eli Volum again. I guess I would argue that we are currently going through the process as it is outlined under existing statutes and directives. And by what I've heard people talk about as the proper process is an interpretation of what might be a proper process under some future legislation that is not yet in place. So I think what we are looking at today is following the process as it stands today. And I very well hear the concerns that people are making, but it's based on speculation about things that might happen. And it sounds like there's enough checks and balances in place to have to come back and go through the administrative rules process to adopt codes. And of course, any future legislation could potentially bypass that, but that's, again, pure speculation. So I think what we're looking at today is following the process as outlined. Building Codes Division is directed to put out an aspirational reach code. And if we don't pass something today, then I'd say, how are we going to support Building Codes Division and state goals in putting out a reach code as it's outlined in the rules that we're supposed to be following?
Through the chair, this is John Cameller. This is John Cameller again. 2 points. First of all, with or without our recommendation, is it possible for the legislature just to adopt this anyway? I mean, does it exist without our recommendation?
Well, the legislature, I guess, can do as they please to the first question. So certainly they could just say whatever code, whatever standard, that's the code. And sorry, what was your second question?
Well, the second question is, I thought that you indicated in the last question I asked that this bill indicated that there needed to be cost and information that was part of it, just like a regular code. And you said that was one of the reasons why it would have to go back through the cycle. But I'm looking at the recommended or the optional motions that were printed in our material, and every one of them, or the two that are approving, both say, with the added finding that added cost, if any, is necessary to the health and safety of the occupants or the public, or necessary to conserve scarce resources. So it is putting that recommendation on it, the options that have been presented by the Building Codes Division. So I guess all I'm saying is that by the time this filters down to a little town who's making a decision, they're going to see that the legislature said they can adopt it, and that the Residential Structures Board approved it, and that the finding, or the motion, included a finding that it was necessary. And it's not necessary, it's aspirational. Thank you.
Sure, yeah. Adding the cost finding language to the motions was us trying to mirror the general code adoption process that we were talking about earlier, having some of those additional trappings. Certainly those aren't the only options. Normally, going into code adoption, the rest of that motion would say, and forward to the administrator for rulemaking and subsequent adoption, right? It doesn't say that, but also the board could make a recommendation without a cost finding. The board could make a recommendation that includes explicit language about only for the purpose of an aspirational code. There are more options than we made there. The purpose of having that cost language in there was really just to kind of mirror code adoption and make sure we flagged that there should be a discussion of what the cost is. But the board doesn't have to make that finding.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Is there any other board comment? We're going to have to move. We're going to have to push this to a motion here pretty quickly.
That was through the chair. I would echo Eli and Blake's comments that, we're supposed to be voting on what's before us today. There's a lot of what ifs that could happen, but I think we need to focus on what's before us and vote on this. Thanks.
Does anybody have a motion to put before a vote?
Through the chair, this is John Camiller.
Yep. Go ahead, John.
I recommend approval of the proposed 2021 ORSC as purely an aspirational code with no intent for it to be implemented by any state or any city outside the code adoption process within BCD. That's it.
We have a motion. Do we have any discussion on that?
We need a second before we have discussion.
Yeah, we need a second. Do we have a second?
I guess if that's a proper motion, I would second that.
Now, do we have any discussion? Seeing none, we're going to use the roll for calling for a vote. So Melissa, would you please call the roll?
Construction Industry Energy Board, vote first. Gary Heikkinen.
Yes.
Kale Suslog. Here, see us left the meeting, Mr. Chair. Ryan Richards.
Yes.
Thomas Kyle.
Yes.
Blake Shalide.
Yes.
Chair Jay Hansen.
No.
Walter Cottle. Mr. Cottle, could you give, oh, thank you. He votes yes in the chat. Thank you, Mr. Cottle. John Camiller.
Yes.
Eli Volum.
Yes.
Matthew Roselle.
Yes.
Travis Argue.
Yes.
Mr. Chair, the motion carries, and now I will read the Residential and Manufactured Structures Board. Gordon Anslow.
No.
James Austin.
Yes.
John Camiller.
Yes.
Rich Fry.
No.
Emily Hemper.
Yes.
Rich Tovar.
No.
Eli Volum.
Yes.
Vice Chair Ruby Timmerhalette.
Yes.
Mr. Chair, the motion carries
Very
for
good.
that
Thank
board as well. And may I refer to Administrator Cox that that is correct on the tallies? Thank you.
Okay, now we will move on to, we have one more unfinished business, don't we? Or is this the only unfinished business, Melissa?
Yes, Mr. Chair. Now we're moving to, actually, we're going to move to item 6B. Pull that forward to the top.
Right, board consultation about solicitation for participants for a work group, which will consider the incorporation of home sizes in the Chapter 11 provisions of the ORSC. So Tyler, will you please let us know what we're to consider in this regard?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Again, Tyler Glaze, Policy Analyst for the Division. So for this item, the Division continues to move forward with Chapter 11 energy efficiency provisions in the ORSC in order to meet the requirements of Executive Orders, also called EOs 1720 and 2004. The Division recognizes that energy efficiency measures may have varying impacts depending on the size of the home. Additionally, these measures may have an impact on affordable housing depending on the application. Further study of the impact of energy code provisions that consider home sizing in their application may provide an avenue to increase energy efficiency while mitigating impact on affordable housing. The Division requests the board's approval to solicit participants in a work group. This work group will consider ways of incorporating home size considerations into Chapter 11 of the ORSC. The Division and Oregon Department of Energy, ODO, are also conducting outreach to receive input from stakeholders not normally in the code adoption process. The Division welcomes suggestions from the board about participants for this work group, as well as areas of discussion that would be of interest to the board. And Mark Heiser is also available if you have any questions.
Do we have any comments? Do we have any suggestions? Do we want to just let staff reach out and look? Or I mean, there's no motion. We're not doing anything. We're providing feedback. Okay. Hearing none. Staff, would you take the normal procedures in investigating for the creation of this particular board? And moving on, board review approval of technical, and that's what we just did. So now we're moving up to unfinished business. Is that correct, Melissa?
We are on new business.
New business?
Correct. That's correct.
So we go. Bear with me, everyone. Tyler.
Chair Hansen, sorry, while you're looking, Alana Cox with the division. The reason we wanted to move up that item was because it's for the residential board. I believe now all the residential board business is done, and I know folks are busy, so welcome to stay, but no more votes from the residential board.
Right. I would personally be very offended if anybody left. My goodness. Okay. Okay. So for new business, we're going to review and approve the technical and scientific facts of the statewide alternate method. But I'm getting myself confused, Melissa.
You are in the correct place, and then Tyler will start this out, and Mr. Heiser then will give an update, and we do have some public testimony for this item.
Tyler, you're up. It all sounds the same to me, or a little bit similar enough that it confuses me, but Tyler, you're up.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Again, members of the boards, I am Tyler Glaze, Policy Analyst for the division. As Melissa mentioned, after I give this brief summary, Mark Heiser will discuss the technical aspects of this issue, and we have several individuals signed up for oral testimony. So to give some background, the division is requesting that the board review and approve the technical and scientific facts of the statewide alternate method number 2102. A statewide alternate method, for those that aren't aware or may have forgotten, it's approved by the Building Codes Division Administrator in consultation with the appropriate advisory board, which would be you fine folks. In making these rulings, the administrator must obtain the approval of the appropriate advisory board as to the technical and scientific facts of the proposed alternate method. Prior to the adoption of ASHRAE 90.1 2019, SAM 1901 allowed the use of an Oregon amendment for mass wall allowances. The adoption of ASHRAE 90.1 2019 discontinues that SAM effective October 1, 2021. At the rulemaking hearing prior to the adoption of ASHRAE 90.1 2019, there was testimony that requested the division reconsider the elimination of the exception in SAM 1901. Division staff reviewed the practices in neighboring states with similar energy goals and climate zones. Washington and California have both adopted a similar mass wall exception into their codes. After studying this issue, they came to the conclusion that the mass wall exception was aligned with the goals of the Energy Code as well as durability and resiliency goals. After reviewing Washington and California's conclusions, the division proposes adopting SAM 2102, which includes the mass wall exception from SAM 1901. There are additional details as well as the proposed SAM language in the document below. The division welcomes any discussion that the board may have. And please note a previous version of the SAM document incorrectly included language that limited the B2 exception to buildings with heating only. That was an error, and that language has been removed. And I believe Mark Heiser has some further technical information, Mr. Chair.
You're up, Mark.
Thank you, Chair Hansen. For the record, again, Mark Heiser with division. Wanted to give a little additional background for this from the adoption aspect. The CIEB actually, earlier when we were looking at the adoption of the 2018 IECC, this was actually reviewed before the board and the adoption committee. At that point, of course, then the process was stopped and we moved to ASHRAE 90.1 2016. This is a footnote that is added to allow a certain limited list of structures that to use insulated cavities in CMU construction to meet the minimum code requirement. We've had this for some time in the Oregon code. The state of Washington, for their 2021 code, is including the exact same language in their modification of the 2018 International Energy Conservation Code. It is the language is being modified here for inclusion in the ASHRAE 90.1 2019 language. One piece that we do have excuse me, in addition to Washington, is something we included in our statewide alternate method in Oregon, is that restroom and concession facilities, which we do get a lot of calls about, that have a hard time meeting the, that have some need for freeze protection and minimum heat requirements. Those are also included on the list of buildings. It's pretty limited to buildings that need a lot of durability, gymnasiums, manufacturing plants, pump stations, storage facilities, restrooms and concession stands, mechanical and electrical structures, warehouse facilities, motor vehicle facilities are on the list. So this is really aligning with the other West Coast states and make sure that we're, and it is by using the Washington methodology, we are more restrictive and have a higher efficiency level than our neighbors to the south in California. When we compared climate zone to climate zone, they would allow a slightly lower threshold for thermal efficiency. So, but we are in alignment with our neighbors to the north, state of Washington. Both of these states have very thorough review of code, and that is what is before the board today. I'll be available to answer any questions if you'd like. Thank you.
So we have public comment on this. Tyler, is now appropriate for public comment?
Mr. Chair, yes, it is. Allow me to bring up that list. First off, with your permission, Mr. Chair, is Tom Young, the Executive Director of Northwest Concrete Masonry Association.
Yeah, yes, thank you. Good morning, everyone. And through the chair, this is Tom Young with the Northwest Concrete Masonry Association. I'd just like to simply state that the entire masonry industry, which includes contractors, material manufacturers, and the labor unions, support the division's recommendation in front of you of adoption of the proposed SAM that relates to mass wall construction. I believe the SAM information provided as background and discussion, along with Mark's comments this morning, provide an excellent rationale for approval. So I will only simply add to that it does provide continuity from our previous codes. This is a provision that has worked well in the past. It allows the continuation of cost-effective options for Oregon designers and building owners when they're using specific commercial building types that require durable wall systems. So I appreciate the opportunity to comment and would ask the board to approve this proposal that's in front of them today. And thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Tom. Adam Hutchins, are you available? I cannot hear you, Adam.
All right, can you hear me now?
Yes.
My name is Adam Hutchinson, and I'm with the Masonry Institute of Washington as their technical director. Likewise to what Tom said earlier, we are in approval of, or we are looking for approval of this amendment, or the SAM, so that we can continue to support the masonry industry in these certain building types where durability and resilience is of utmost importance to our clients, as well as the building owners through the lifetime of their buildings. This code amendment has proven to be very economically important to building manufacturers throughout the Northwest as well, or the concrete block manufacturers throughout the Northwest as well. Removal of this exception would impact heavily one or two of our manufacturers that supply block throughout Oregon. Again, thank you for allowing me to comment, and I appreciate any approval of this state alternate method.
Thank you. Is Tonya Sorrell-Neal available?
Hello, I am Tanya Neal. Brian Trimble also had to hop off, so I'm going to just make a couple comments for both my group and his group, so to keep this brief. I represent the Masonry Institute of Oregon and the International Masonry Institute, who Brian represents as well. And I'm not going to repeat anybody's comments. We've worked with the department. We appreciate their time, and we are in support of the amendment that they have drafted. So unless anyone has any questions, I will give the floor back.
Thank you very much. Is there any board comments, questions, or feedback? Okay, seeing none, I just want to clarify that we are approving this amendment to the existing SAM. Is that correct, Alana? For Mark?
Yeah, the question, there's some motions on there. The board's role in a statewide alternate method is to approve the scientific and technical facts.
Mr. Chair, on trial, I make a motion to approve the technical and scientific facts of the proposed alternate method.
Do we have a second?
I'll second.
All those, Melissa, could you please call the roll for the vote?
Yes. Gary Heikkinen.
Yes.
Kel Zuschlach has left the meeting. Ryan Richards.
Aye, yes.
Thomas Kyle.
Yes.
Blake Schlide.
Yes.
Chair Jay Hansen.
Yes.
Walter Cottle.
Yes.
John Camiller.
Yeah.
Eli Volum.
Yes.
Matthew Roselle.
Yes.
Travis Argue.
Yes.
Mr. Chair, the motion passes unanimously.
Very good. Thank you, Melissa. Moving on to communications. Tyler, do you have some communications for the board?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Tyler Glaze, Policy Analyst for the division. If you look in your agenda at agenda item 6A, you may recall this from 2 very short hours ago that I brought this up. This is the division is requesting that the board review and consult on the division's proposed process and timeline for developing and adopting the 2022 Oregon Commercial REACH Code. ORS 455-500 requires that the division, in consultation with the Construction Industry Energy Board, adopt a REACH code, a code separate from the state building code. The REACH code is a set of statewide optional construction standards and methods that are economically and technically feasible, which are intended to increase energy efficiency. The division adopts one REACH code specific to the 2 residential structures and one specific to commercial structures. The division is planning on adopting the 2022 OCRC with an October 1st, 2022 effective date, and is advising the board that the division is starting the process of adopting the 2022 commercial REACH code. So if you look below that, there are several dates that the division anticipates following as far as process steps for developing the 2022 OCRC. July 28th, 2021 is this board meeting today, kicking off the process of adopting the 2022 OCRC by advising and consulting with CIEB. August 2021, the process will start by the division developing a baseline code using a process adapted from the Massachusetts stretch code methodology. The method will target improvements to the current 2021 OEESC. Late summer, fall 2021, the division will begin accepting proposals for inclusion in the 2022 OCRC. The proposals will be based on the baseline code model developed by the division. After the public proposal period closes, the division, along with the Oregon Department of Energy, will hold public meetings to review, combine, amend, or take other action on the proposals received, and then create a summary document along with a draft OCRC. The division will then present the final OCRC to CIEB for consultation by the spring of 2022. And after consulting with the board, the division will continue with the rulemaking process to adopt the 2022 OCRC with that previously mentioned October 1st, 2022 effective date. So what we are doing now is welcoming, the board's discussion of the 2022 OCRC development and adoption discussed just previously.
Okay, does anybody have any comments about this process or beginning this process?
Yeah, through the chair, this is Eli Volum. Seems like this is a good opportunity to reflect on the conversation we had about the residential reach code. And some of the things I heard were desire to have more engineering analysis and more information from third-party neutral agencies to provide data about cost findings. So I guess that's probably what I would put out there for discussion is how we might be able to get the information that can support what we would like to see Building Codes Division bring back to the boards.
I would second that, Eli, and that's an excellent comment. This at our point in the meeting right now, there's no motion or board vote needed. Can we make a motion to direct staff and the agency to follow those procedures? Is that appropriate?
Mr. Chair, if I may, I believe Administrator Cox would like to say something on this issue.
Because it wasn't noticed as an action item on your agenda, not appropriate to make a motion, but we'll just do it. How about that? You don't need to make a motion. That's great feedback and helpful to know what you want to see.
I would like the division to follow the normal procedures that we do for all other code adoptions for this development. That would be my personal desire. Any other comments? Ryan, I saw. Oh, okay. All right. I saw.
No, I agree with what others are echoing and saying.
Okay, we can move to adjournment if there are no other comments. So, Jay Hansen, Chair of the CIEB. There being no further business, this combined meeting is now adjourned at, I have 11:18.